For 10 years, the answer sat inside a small-town garage. Nobody listened until a billion-dollar company began falling apart. The transport truck arrived just after sunrise, its brakes hissing softly as it backed toward the service bay. Another damaged engine. Another delivery from Mercer Mobility. The driver stepped out, clipboard in hand, and barely looked up. "Morning, Cole." "Morning." "Same issue as the last one." Cole Harrison nodded and signed the paperwork. The exchange lasted less than 30 seconds. It always did. The truck pulled away in a cloud of dust, leaving the heavy engine crate sitting alone in front of the garage. By noon, another one would probably arrive. By next week, there would be more. And by next month, the cycle would repeat itself exactly as it had for nearly a decade. The Harrison garage sat at the edge of a quiet Oklahoma town where people still waved from pickup trucks and knew each other's first names. The building itself was nothing special. Faded white paint, a weathered metal roof, a hand-painted sign that had survived countless summers. Most people drove past without a second glance. But inside, things were different. The scent of motor oil mixed with fresh coffee. Tools hung in perfect order. Workbenches remained spotless despite years of use. Nothing was accidental. Everything had a purpose. Cole lifted the hood-sized cover from the crate and stared down at the damaged engine. His expression never changed. He simply studied it. Quietly, carefully, like a doctor examining a patient whose symptoms he had already seen 100 times before. He reached for a notebook resting on a nearby shelf. The cover was worn. The pages were filled with handwriting. Dates, measurements, observations, patterns. He flipped through several entries before writing a new line. Then another. Then another. The pencil paused. Cole stared at the page for several seconds before circling the same phrase he had written many times before. The same phrase that appeared in notebook after notebook. The same phrase nobody ever seemed interested in reading. A small bell rang above the office door. "Dad." Cole looked up and smiled. His 11-year-old daughter Lily stepped inside, carrying 2 paper bags from the diner down the street. "You skipped breakfast again." "Did I?" "You always do when those engines show up." Cole laughed softly. "Maybe." Lily set the bags down and glanced toward the newest delivery. "Another one?" "Another one." "Same problem." Cole looked back at the notebook. "Looks that way." Lily shook her head. "That seems important." "It is." "Then why does nobody fix it?" The question lingered in the air. Outside, wind moved gently through the tall grass beside the highway. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Cole closed the notebook. Sometimes people only hear what they expect to hear. Lily frowned. "That sounds frustrating." "Sometimes." She looked toward the growing stack of notebooks on the shelf. There were 10 of them now. 10 years. 10 volumes filled with observations collected from hundreds of failed engines. To most people, they looked like old journals. To Cole, they looked like evidence. Across the state in downtown Tulsa, Charlotte Mercer stood before a room full of investors. Giant screens displayed growth charts and sales figures. Cameras flashed. Applause followed every announcement. Mercer Mobility had become one of the fastest-growing automotive companies in the country. Analysts praised its leadership. Business magazines featured its CEO on their covers. Reporters called her a visionary. Charlotte accepted the praise with calm confidence. She had earned much of it. Years of hard work had built the company into a powerhouse. Yet hidden beneath the success was a problem nobody wanted to discuss. Service reports were increasing. Warranty claims were growing. Certain engine failures continued appearing in numbers large enough to concern technicians, but small enough to ignore in board meetings. Every damaged engine eventually found its way to one destination: Harrison Garage. Back in Oklahoma, Cole turned another page in his notebook. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the open bay door, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. He compared measurements, reviewed older entries, checked dates. Then he slowly exhaled. The pattern was still there, unchanged, consistent, predictable. For 10 years, he had watched it repeat itself. For 10 years, he had documented everything. For 10 years, he had sent the same recommendation through service channels whenever Mercer Mobility requested diagnostic reports. And for 10 years, nothing happened. Lily watched him quietly. "You already know what caused it, do not you?" Cole smiled. "I think I do." "Then why keep writing it down?" He looked toward the shelf filled with notebooks. "Because truth matters even when nobody is listening." Lily nodded as if that answer made perfect sense. Outside, Another truck passed on the highway. Inside, Cole opened the newest notebook and added one final sentence beneath the day's entry. Then he underlined it. Not because it was new, because it was the same warning he had been writing for 10 years. And somewhere hundreds of miles away, the company that ignored it was about to discover exactly how expensive silence could become. Most people in Cedar Creek knew Cole Harrison as the man who could fix almost anything with an engine. They knew him as the quiet mechanic at the edge of town. They knew him as Lily's father. They knew him as the man who never raised his voice, never missed a school event, and never turned away a customer who was stranded. What they did not know was who he had been before the garage. The morning after the latest Mercer engine arrived, the sun rose over miles of Oklahoma farmland, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and orange. Cole was already awake. He always was. By 6 o'clock, he had opened the garage doors, brewed a pot of coffee, and completed his first inspection of the day. The familiar sounds of tools clicking against metal filled the workshop. The scent of motor oil drifted through the air. Everything felt ordinary. That was exactly how he preferred it. A customer pulled into the lot driving an aging pickup truck. "Morning, Cole." "Morning, Frank." "Think you can save her again?" Frank asked with a grin. Cole glanced under the hood. "Probably. You always say probably. Because guarantees are expensive." Frank laughed. Most conversations in the garage sounded like that. Simple, comfortable, honest. By noon, 3 more customers had arrived. A farmer needing transmission work. A schoolteacher with a faulty alternator. A retired firefighter whose classic truck needed attention. Cole treated each one the same way. No rush. No ego, just patience and skill. Across the room, Lily sat at a small desk finishing homework while occasionally helping organize parts. She had grown up in the garage. To her, the sounds of impact wrenches and air compressors felt as normal as birds singing outside. Around 2 o'clock, the local mail carrier entered carrying a small package. Special delivery. Cole signed for it and set the box on his workbench. Lily looked up. "What is it?" "Probably another manual." "You get excited about manuals." "Some people get excited about football." Lily shook her head. "You are definitely a mechanic." Cole smiled but said nothing. The truth was more complicated than that. Years earlier, before Cedar Creek, before the garage, before life became smaller and simpler, Cole Harrison had lived in a very different world. He once walked through engineering centers filled with prototype engines and advanced testing equipment. Teams of specialists gathered around conference tables waiting for his input. Executives requested his analysis. Major manufacturers competed for his expertise. At 32 years old, he had become one of the most respected powertrain engineers in the industry. Industry magazines quoted him. Engineering conferences invited him to speak. Recruiters called constantly. Back then, his future seemed limitless. Then everything changed. Not because of failure. Not because of scandal. Life simply demanded something different. When his wife became seriously ill, priorities shifted. Deadlines lost importance. Awards became meaningless. Career opportunities no longer mattered. By the time she passed away, Cole faced a choice. Continue chasing success or become the father his daughter needed. He never hesitated. He left the industry, sold his house, moved back to Oklahoma, bought a struggling garage, started over. Most people assumed he had stepped down. In reality, he had stepped towards something more important. The bell above the office door rang again. Lily walked over carrying 2 sandwiches from the diner. "Dad, lunch." "Already? You say that every day." They sat together at the small table near the window. Outside, traffic drifted slowly through town. Inside, the afternoon sunlight reflected off chrome tools and polished workbenches. "Do you ever miss it?" Lily asked suddenly. Cole looked up. "Miss what?" "The engineer stuff." The question lingered. Cole considered it carefully. "Sometimes. A lot." He glanced around the garage, then at his daughter, then at the customers who trusted him. "Not as much as people think." Lily nodded. She understood more than most adults gave her credit for. Across the state in downtown Tulsa, Charlotte Mercer stood on a stage accepting another business leadership award. Cameras flashed. Applause echoed through the ballroom. Reporters praised her vision. Investors celebrated another successful quarter. Yet buried inside company service records, another Mercer engine had already been marked for transport to Harrison Garage. Then another. Then another. Nobody noticed the pattern. Nobody connected the dots. Nobody except the man quietly recording every failure inside a row of worn notebooks sitting on a shelf nearly 200 miles away. That evening, after closing the garage, Cole opened the newest notebook and compared recent entries against records from 9 years earlier. The same warning appeared again. The same design concern. The same developing flaw. His expression remained calm, but his eyes revealed something deeper. Concern. Because the pattern was accelerating now. And for the first time in 10 years, the numbers suggested that whatever had been slowly growing inside Mercer Mobility was no longer staying hidden. Charlotte Mercer had spent years becoming the kind of leader people admired. Business magazines called her brilliant. Industry analysts called her fearless. Investors called her a visionary. At 38 years old, she stood at the top of one of the fastest-growing automotive companies in America. Every quarter seemed stronger than the last. Every announcement generated headlines. Every new vehicle launch brought another wave of praise. On the surface, Mercer Mobility looked unstoppable. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Charlotte stood inside a glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Tulsa. The city stretched across the horizon beneath low gray clouds. Executives filled the room. Screens displayed charts, projections, and production forecasts. The atmosphere felt confident, almost celebratory. Production numbers exceeded expectations again, one executive announced. Customer demand remains extremely strong. Another nodded. Dealers are requesting additional inventory. Charlotte smiled slightly. Good. Keep expanding. Around the table, people scribbled notes. Financial reports moved from hand to hand. Everything appeared healthy. Everything appeared successful. Yet hidden among hundreds of pages of data sat a report few people bothered to examine closely. Service claims, warranty repairs, engine replacements, small percentages, minor increases, numbers that looked insignificant when compared to billions in revenue. The report received less than 2 minutes of discussion before the meeting moved on. No one noticed. No one except a young engineer sitting near the end of the table. His name was Daniel Reeves, 28 years old, intelligent, observant, quiet. While the meeting continued, he kept looking at the service report. Something about the trend bothered him. The failures were not dramatic. They were not widespread enough to create panic. But they were growing. Slowly, consistently, predictably. The pattern felt familiar. After the meeting ended, Daniel approached one of the senior engineering managers. Have we looked deeper into these engine failures? The manager barely glanced up. Quality control is monitoring them. The numbers are increasing, still within acceptable limits. Daniel frowned. What if they are connected? The manager shrugged. Then somebody will figure it out. The conversation ended there. It often did. Meanwhile, 200 miles away, another Mercer engine arrived at Harrison Garage. The transport driver rolled the crate onto the concrete floor and handed over the paperwork. Busy day, he asked. Usually is, Cole replied. The driver looked around at the shelves. You know, I think half our company knows this address by heart. Cole smiled faintly. That is probably not a good sign. The driver laughed and left. Once again, silence returned to the garage. Rain tapped softly against the metal roof. A radio played country music somewhere in the background. Lily sat near the office window reading a library book while Cole opened the crate. The moment he saw the engine, he sighed. Not dramatically, not angrily, just the sigh of a man seeing the same mistake for the 100th time. He reached for the newest notebook. Then he opened several older ones beside it. Page after page revealed identical observations. Dates changed. Vehicle models changed. Engine generations changed. But one underlying issue remained stubbornly present. 10 years. Hundreds of engines. One recurring warning. Cole carefully wrote another entry. Lily looked up. The same thing again. The same thing again. That cannot be a coincidence anymore. Cole nodded slowly. No, it cannot. Back in Tulsa, Charlotte spent the afternoon giving interviews. Reporters asked about growth strategies, expansion plans, market leadership. She answered every question with confidence earned through years of hard work. Cameras flashed. Headlines were written. Yet while Charlotte discussed the future, another Mercer customer sat in a dealership waiting room watching technicians inspect a failed engine. Then another customer. Then another. The incidents remained scattered, unconnected, easy to dismiss individually. But collectively, they were beginning to form something larger. That evening, Daniel Reeves stayed late at headquarters. Most employees had already gone home. The building felt quieter now. He opened historical service records and began searching through archived repair reports. Thousands of files appeared. Hours passed. Rain streaked down the office windows. Finally, he noticed something unusual. Certain diagnostic notes kept repeating. Different years, different vehicles, different technicians. Yet similar language appeared again and again. One source appeared more often than any other. Harrison Garage, Cedar Creek, Oklahoma. Daniel clicked another report. Then another. Then another. The same garage. The same mechanic. The same warning. His eyes narrowed. "What have you been trying to tell us?" he whispered. 200 miles away, Cole locked the garage for the night and switched off the lights. Only one lamp remained glowing above the workbench. The newest notebook lay open beside 9 others. 10 years of observations. 10 years of evidence. 10 years of being ignored. Before leaving, he glanced down at the latest entry. Then he underlined one sentence. The same sentence he had written countless times before. The difference was that now the numbers were changing faster than ever. And somewhere deep inside Mercer Mobility, someone had finally started paying attention. The first sign appeared on a Thursday morning. Most people never noticed it. A brief article appeared on a financial website. A handful of customers reported unexpected engine failures. Analysts called it a minor issue. Company representatives described it as routine. Investors barely reacted. By lunchtime, the story had already disappeared beneath newer headlines. At Mercer Mobility headquarters, executives treated the situation the same way. Small, temporary, contained. Charlotte Mercer sat at the head of a conference table reviewing quarterly projections while department leaders delivered updates. The atmosphere remained calm, confident, familiar. Then a vice president cleared his throat. "There is one additional item." Charlotte looked up. "Go ahead." Customer service reported another increase in engine-related complaints. A few executives exchanged glances. Nobody seemed alarmed. "How significant?" Charlotte asked. "Still manageable." The answer sounded reassuring. Yet something in the room felt different. Not dramatic, just slightly off. Like the first distant rumble of a storm still hidden beyond the horizon. Across town, Daniel Reeves sat in his office surrounded by repair reports. He had barely touched lunch. Files covered his desk. Service records filled his computer screen. Every hour revealed another pattern. Another similarity. Another warning. The deeper he looked, the more uncomfortable he became. Hundreds of cases. Thousands of pages. One recurring observation. Harrison Garage, Cedar Creek, Oklahoma. He opened another archived report. Then another. Then another. Every time the same recommendation appeared. Not identical wording. Not identical formatting. But the same conclusion. The same concern. The same design weakness. Daniel leaned back slowly. "How did nobody see this?" he whispered. The answer was simple. Nobody had been looking. Meanwhile, life in Cedar Creek continued exactly as it always had. Customers came and went. Farmers discussed weather forecasts. Local kids rode bicycles down Main Street. At Harrison Garage, Cole spent the afternoon rebuilding an old truck engine while country music drifted softly from a radio near the office. Nothing about the scene suggested he was connected to a growing corporate problem hundreds of miles away. Lily walked into the garage carrying a cold lemonade. "You missed lunch again." "Did I?" "Twice this week." Cole smiled. "That sounds like me." She handed him the drink and glanced toward the row of notebooks. "More Mercer engines?" "3 this week." Lily frowned. "That seems like a lot." Cole nodded slowly. "It is." He did not say anything else. He rarely did. But Lily noticed the concern in his eyes. It had been growing for months now. Maybe years. He simply never talked about it. Back in Tulsa, the situation worsened faster than anyone expected. Friday brought another wave of complaints. Saturday brought more. By Monday morning, dealership service centers across multiple states were reporting unusual numbers of engine failures. The individual cases still appeared unrelated. But together they formed a trend impossible to ignore. Emergency meetings filled the executive calendar. Department heads requested data reviews. Quality assurance teams launched investigations. Charlotte moved from conference room to conference room, attempting to understand what was happening. "What is causing this?" she asked. No one had a clear answer. "Is it manufacturing?" "We are still checking." "Supplier issue?" "Possibly." "Software?" "We do not know." The uncertainty frustrated everyone. Mercer Mobility had solutions for most problems. This time they only had questions. Late Monday evening, Charlotte stood alone in her office, staring out at the city lights. Rain streaked across the glass. Her reflection stared back at her from the window. For years, she had built a reputation on preparation, planning, control. Yet this felt different. Something hidden was moving beneath the surface. Something larger than a simple warranty issue. Several floors below, Daniel remained at his desk long after everyone else left. He opened another repair file from Harrison Garage. Then another. Then another. Suddenly his eyes stopped moving. He leaned forward. Read the report again. Then compared it with records from 7 years earlier. The wording was different. The conclusion was not. A chill ran through him. He opened additional files. 5 years earlier. 6 years earlier. 9 years earlier. The same warning appeared every time. Daniel immediately printed the reports. The stack grew thicker and thicker. By midnight it filled an entire binder. He stared at it in disbelief. 10 years. 10 years of documented evidence. 10 years of recommendations. 10 years of observations that should have triggered deeper investigations. Instead, they disappeared into databases nobody reviewed. The next morning, while executives prepared for another crisis meeting, a transport truck arrived at Harrison Garage carrying yet another failed engine. The driver stepped out and shook his head. Business must be booming. Cole looked at the crate, then at the dark clouds gathering overhead. I do not think that is what this means. The driver laughed politely, unaware of the weight behind those words. After he left, Cole opened the newest shipment and immediately recognized the damage pattern. The same one. Again. He sighed and reached for his notebook. Then he paused. For the first time in 10 years, his phone began ringing before he could write the next entry. The caller identification displayed a number from Mercer Mobility headquarters. The phone continued ringing. Once, twice, 3 times. Cole stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Harrison Garage. Silence followed briefly. Then a nervous voice spoke. Mr. Harrison, my name is Daniel Reeves. I am an engineer with Mercer Mobility. Cole leaned against the workbench. How can I help you? Papers shuffled on the other end. The young engineer sounded exhausted. I think I need to ask you some questions. Lily glanced up from her desk as Cole listened quietly. For nearly 20 minutes, Daniel spoke. He described rising failure rates, internal investigations, emergency meetings, customer complaints. He sounded like a man trying to solve a puzzle while realizing someone else had already finished it years ago. Finally, he paused. There is something I need to know. Go ahead. Did you really document this issue for 10 years? Cole looked toward the shelf of notebooks. Yes. Another silence followed. This one lasted longer. And the reports were sent through official channels? Every time an engine came through. Daniel exhaled slowly. I cannot believe nobody noticed. Cole's voice remained calm. People are busy. That is not an excuse. Maybe not. Daniel looked down at the stack of printed reports covering his desk. 10 years of warnings. 10 years of observations. 10 years of data. Every report pointed toward the same root cause. Every report had been archived and forgotten. By the time the call ended, Daniel felt less confused than before, but far more concerned. Because if Cole was right, the company was facing something much larger than a quality control issue. Later that afternoon, Mercer Mobility stock dropped nearly 12%. News outlets picked up the story. Analysts demanded answers. Social media filled with frustrated customer experiences. Dealership service departments struggled to keep up. Television screens inside headquarters displayed market updates every few minutes. None of them looked good. Inside an executive conference room, Charlotte Mercer stood before a wall-sized display filled with numbers she had never wanted to see. How many vehicles are affected? She asked. No one answered immediately. That alone frightened her. Finally, one executive spoke. We are still calculating. Another added quietly. The estimate keeps increasing. Charlotte folded her arms. What are we missing? The room remained silent. Then Daniel cleared his throat. Several executives turned toward him. He rarely spoke during meetings. I think we have been looking in the wrong place. Charlotte narrowed her eyes. Explain. Daniel placed a thick binder on the table. The sound echoed across the room. These are repair reports. Charlotte glanced at the binder. From who? One mechanic. Several people exchanged confused looks. One executive laughed softly. A mechanic? Daniel did not smile. 10 years of records. The laughter disappeared. Charlotte stepped closer. Daniel opened the binder. Page after page revealed the same pattern. The same observations. The same warning. The same recommendation. Hundreds of entries. Hundreds of engines. Hundreds of opportunities to listen. Nobody in the room spoke. Charlotte turned another page. Then another. Then another. The evidence became impossible to ignore. "Who is this person?" she finally asked. Daniel answered quietly. "Cole Harrison." The name meant nothing to most executives. To Charlotte, however, it sounded familiar. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she remembered seeing the name attached to repair reports years ago. She simply never paid attention. Why would she? He was a mechanic. At least that was what everyone assumed. Back in Cedar Creek, life remained remarkably normal despite the growing storm elsewhere. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds. Customers arrived. Engines were repaired. Lily finished homework near the office window. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the garage. Cole rebuilt a transmission while a baseball game played quietly on the radio. If someone walked into the garage that moment, they would never guess a billion-dollar corporation was studying his notebooks. Around 5 o'clock, Lily noticed something unusual. 3 black SUVs turned off the highway and entered town. They moved slowly down Main Street. Local residents glanced up from storefronts. The vehicles looked out of place among farm trucks and family sedans. One eventually stopped outside the garage. Then another. Then another. Lily walked toward the window. "Dad." Cole looked up. I think visitors are here." Outside, several people stepped out of the vehicles wearing business attire. Their expressions looked serious. Not angry. Not aggressive. Just overwhelmed. Like people carrying questions they should have asked years earlier. One of them was Daniel Reeves. He stood beside the garage entrance holding the binder against his chest. Cole wiped his hands with a shop towel and walked toward the door. The afternoon light stretched across the concrete floor behind him. For 10 years, nobody had come looking for answers. Now they were driving across the state to find them. And standing in the center of the group, stepping out of the final SUV, was Charlotte Mercer herself. The garage grew unusually quiet as Charlotte Mercer stepped through the open service bay. The executives who accompanied her seemed unsure where to stand. Their polished shoes looked out of place on the stained concrete floor. Their expensive jackets contrasted sharply with the shelves of tools, spare parts, and engine components surrounding them. For years they had operated from glass offices and conference rooms. Now they stood inside the place where hundreds of their company's failed engines had ended up. Cole Harrison greeted them with the same calm expression he gave every customer. "Good afternoon." Charlotte looked around the garage before meeting his eyes. "Mr. Harrison." The words sounded strangely formal, almost cautious. Lily watched from the office doorway while Daniel Reeves held the thick binder against his chest. Nobody seemed eager to speak first. Finally, Charlotte broke the silence. "You have quite a collection." Her gaze settled on the row of notebooks lining the shelf. 10 volumes. Worn covers. Handwritten labels. Years of observations stored in plain sight. Cole glanced toward them. "Those?" Charlotte nodded. "Those? Just notes." Daniel almost laughed. "They are a little more than notes." Charlotte walked toward the shelf. One by one she examined the notebooks. The dates stretched back further than she expected. Entire years documented carefully. Every engine tracked. Every failure recorded. Every recommendation preserved. She pulled one notebook free and opened it. The handwriting was precise. Organized. Detailed. Several pages later, she found the same warning Daniel had shown her in Tulsa. Then she found it again. And again. And again. The room remained silent except for the distant hum of an air compressor. Charlotte slowly closed the notebook. "You documented all of this?" "Yes." "Why?" The question surprised everyone. Even Cole paused for a moment. Then he shrugged slightly. "Because that was my job." Charlotte stared at him. "Nobody asked you to do this." "The engines did." Daniel looked away, trying not to smile. The answer sounded simple. Yet somehow it carried more weight than anything discussed inside Mercer headquarters all week. Charlotte placed the notebook back on the shelf. "You knew there was a design problem." "I suspected one." "For 10 years." "Yes." "And you kept sending reports." "Every time." Charlotte folded her arms. "Why did you never call someone directly?" Cole looked toward the latest damaged engine sitting on the workbench. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the garage door and reflected off the metal casing. "I assumed someone would eventually read the reports." Nobody in the room had a response to that, because they all knew what came next. Nobody had. Daniel finally stepped forward and placed the binder on the workbench. We read them now. Cole opened the binder. Hundreds of photocopied reports filled the pages. He flipped through them slowly. Familiar handwriting. Familiar diagrams. Familiar conclusions. 10 years compressed into one thick volume. You kept everything, he said. Daniel nodded. I thought it was important. For the first time, Cole smiled. Not because he felt vindicated. Because someone had finally taken the work seriously. Charlotte noticed the reaction immediately. It bothered her more than anger would have. If their positions were reversed, she might have been furious, defensive, bitter. Yet Cole showed none of those things. Only quiet professionalism. The kind that came from caring about the work itself rather than recognition. Show me, Charlotte said suddenly. Cole looked up. Show you what? The problem. Several executives exchanged nervous glances. They had spent months searching for answers. Entire departments had investigated the failures. Consulting firms had been hired. Experts had been called. Now the CEO of the company stood inside a small-town garage asking a mechanic to explain what none of them could find. Cole walked toward a damaged engine resting on a steel stand. He picked up a flashlight and pointed toward a specific section deep inside the assembly. It starts here. Everyone moved closer. The garage became completely silent. Charlotte listened carefully as Cole explained. Not in complicated engineering language. Not with dramatic speeches. Just facts. Observations. Patterns. He showed how a tiny design assumption created stress over time. How repeated operating conditions gradually magnified the weakness. How each generation inherited the same flaw because no one traced the failures back far enough. The explanation lasted less than 15 minutes. When he finished, nobody spoke. Several executives stared at the engine. Others stared at the notebooks. Daniel stared at the floor, realizing the answer had existed long before he joined the company. Charlotte remained motionless. Because after months of investigations and years of overlooked warnings, the explanation sounded almost painfully simple. Finally, she looked up. You are telling me our entire crisis started because of this? Cole nodded. Not because of this. Charlotte frowned. Then what? He glanced toward the shelf of notebooks. Because nobody listened when this first appeared 10 years ago. The words settled heavily across the garage. Outside, the wind moved through the tall grass beside the highway. Inside, nobody argued. Nobody disagreed. Because for the first time since the crisis began, everyone in the room understood exactly what had happened. And for the first time in 10 years, Charlotte Mercer realized the man she had never noticed might be the only person who could help save what remained of her company. Charlotte Mercer did not leave immediately. Long after the executives stopped asking questions, long after Daniel finished reviewing notes, long after the afternoon sunlight shifted across the garage floor, she remained standing beside the shelf of notebooks. One by one she examined the worn covers. 10 years. 10 volumes. 10 years of warnings preserved in handwriting nobody bothered to read. The realization was difficult to ignore. Entire departments had access to data. Entire teams reviewed reports. Yet somehow the clearest answers sat inside a small garage in Cedar Creek. How many hours did this take? She asked quietly. Cole glanced toward the notebooks. I never counted. You should have charged us. Cole smiled faintly. That was never the point. Charlotte looked down. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar. Not fear. Not frustration. Humility. Across the room, Daniel continued reviewing additional records while several executives spoke in hushed voices near the service bay. They all understood the situation now. The root cause had finally been identified. Unfortunately, finding the problem and fixing it were two different things. Mercer Mobility still faced enormous challenges. Thousands of affected vehicles remained on the road. Dealerships needed guidance. Customers needed answers. Investors wanted reassurance. Time was running short. Charlotte turned back toward Cole. Can it be fixed? He considered the question carefully. Not because he doubted the answer. Because he respected the truth. Yes. Several executives immediately looked relieved. Then Cole continued. But it will not be easy. The relief disappeared. How long? One executive asked. That depends. On what? Whether you want a quick solution or the right solution. Silence followed. Charlotte almost smiled. She had spent years in boardrooms hearing people promise fast answers. This mechanic refused to offer one. Somehow that made her trust him more. Later that evening, after most of the Mercer team returned to Tulsa, Charlotte remained behind with Daniel. The two sat at a small table inside the diner across from the garage. Outside, the town settled into its normal evening rhythm. Pickup trucks rolled down Main Street. Neon signs flickered softly. The smell of coffee and fresh pie filled the air. It felt like a different world compared to corporate headquarters. Charlotte stirred her coffee absent-mindedly. "Tell me something." Daniel looked up. "Yes. How did we miss this?" Daniel thought for a moment. Then he gave an honest answer. Because nobody expected the answer to come from him. Charlotte stared out the window toward the garage. The lights were still on. Cole continued working despite everything that happened today. "That is not a very good answer." "No." Daniel nodded. "But I think it is the correct one." Across the street, Cole finished repairing a customer's truck while Lily organized tools. The day had been unusual, but he treated it like any other. That was part of who he was. Problems arrived. Work continued. "Dad," Lily asked. Are you going to help them?" Cole placed a wrench on the workbench. "Maybe. Even after they ignored you?" He smiled gently. "People make mistakes. Big mistakes. Sometimes." Lily folded her arms. "I would still be annoyed." Cole laughed softly. "That is because you are 11. She smiled despite herself. Then her expression became thoughtful. "You knew all this was coming, did not you?" Cole looked toward the shelf of notebooks. The evidence had been there for years. The pattern had never changed. Only the scale had. "I knew it was possible. And nobody listened." "Not yet." Lily nodded slowly. She understood the difference. The next morning brought another round of emergency meetings at Mercer headquarters. This time, however, something had changed. For the first time, executives discussed solutions instead of speculation. Diagrams filled conference room screens. Engineering teams reviewed Cole's findings. Repair procedures were drafted. Action plans emerged. Yet one challenge remained. The company needed someone to lead the technical recovery effort. Several senior engineers volunteered. Consultants submitted proposals. Outside experts offered assistance. None of them possessed what Cole Harrison had accumulated over 10 years. Experience, data, context, pattern recognition. Charlotte knew it. Daniel knew it. Everyone in the room knew it. By noon, Charlotte made a decision. She left headquarters again and returned to Cedar Creek. This time she arrived alone. No executives, no assistants, no press, just her. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garage lot as she stepped inside. Cole was rebuilding an engine when she approached. "Mr. Harrison." He looked up and smiled politely. "Back already?" Charlotte nodded. "I need to ask you something." He set down his tools. "All right." She took a deep breath. In boardrooms, requests came easily. This one felt different. "Will you help us fix it?" The garage fell quiet. The question hung in the air between them. Outside, a warm Oklahoma breeze moved through the open bay door. Inside, years of overlooked warnings sat silently on a nearby shelf. And for the first time since the crisis began, the future of Mercer Mobility depended entirely on how one small-town mechanic chose to answer. Charlotte Mercer waited patiently. She did not interrupt. She did not negotiate. She simply stood inside the garage and waited for an answer. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the open bay door, casting long golden beams across the concrete floor. Somewhere outside, a truck rumbled down the highway. Inside, only the soft ticking of cooling metal could be heard. Cole Harrison looked at the engine resting on the stand before him. Then he looked toward the shelf filled with notebooks. 10 years of observations. 10 years of warnings. 10 years of quiet work. Finally he nodded. "Yes." Charlotte exhaled slowly. She had not realized how tense she had become. "Thank you." Cole shrugged lightly. "I am not doing it for the company. I know. I am doing it for the people driving those vehicles." Charlotte nodded. Somehow that answer made her respect him even more. The following week became unlike anything Cedar Creek had ever seen. Engineers arrived from Tulsa carrying laptops, diagrams, and technical reports. Conference calls filled the garage office. Whiteboards appeared beside tool cabinets. The small-town repair shop transformed into the center of an effort involving thousands of vehicles and millions of dollars. Yet despite the attention, very little about Cole changed. He still opened the garage before sunrise. Still fixed local vehicles. Still drank coffee from the same old mug. Still drove the same pickup truck. Daniel Reeves noticed immediately. One morning he arrived before 7 and found Cole already working. "Do you ever sleep?" Daniel asked. Cole smiled. Enough. Daniel laughed. That is not really an answer. It is the only one I have. Throughout the week, engineers reviewed every notebook. The more they studied the records, the more amazed they became. Nothing had been random. Every observation connected to another. Every pattern had been documented. Every prediction had eventually come true. One senior engineer shook his head in disbelief. This is not just troubleshooting. He looked toward Daniel. This is 10 years of research. Meanwhile, Mercer Mobility continued facing pressure. News coverage intensified. Market analysts questioned leadership decisions. Investors demanded updates. Yet something unexpected began happening. For the first time since the crisis started, solutions emerged. Clear solutions. Real solutions. Repair procedures were finalized. New manufacturing guidelines were developed. Service departments received updated instructions. The chaos slowly began turning into a plan. At headquarters, Charlotte noticed the change immediately. Meetings felt different now. Fear was gradually being replaced by confidence. Not because the situation had become easy, because people finally understood it. During one executive meeting, a board member asked the question everyone had been thinking. Who actually discovered this? The room grew quiet. Charlotte looked around the table. Then she answered simply. A mechanic in Cedar Creek. Several people exchanged surprised looks. Charlotte almost smiled. A month earlier, that answer might have sounded ridiculous. Now it sounded undeniable. Back at the garage, Lily watched everything unfold with growing amusement. One afternoon, she sat beside Daniel while engineers discussed repair strategies. You all seem surprised. Daniel looked up from his laptop. About what? About my dad. Several engineers laughed. Daniel smiled. That obvious? Lily nodded. Very. She pointed toward the shelf of notebooks. He has been saying the same thing for years. Daniel followed her gaze. I know. So why did nobody listen? The question landed harder than she intended. Several engineers looked away. Daniel thought carefully before answering. Sometimes people assume expertise only exists in certain places. Lily frowned. That seems silly. Daniel laughed softly. I'm starting to think so too. Days passed. Then weeks. Slowly, the crisis began stabilizing. Repair centers reported success. Failure rates declined. Customer confidence improved. Financial losses remained significant, but the free fall had stopped. Mercer Mobility was finally finding solid ground again. One evening, Charlotte returned to Cedar Creek. This time there were no emergency meetings. No engineering teams. No executives. She found Cole closing the garage for the night. The sun hung low above the horizon, painting the Oklahoma sky in shades of gold and amber. Good news? Cole asked. Charlotte smiled. The first quarter hour without bad news in months. That sounds promising. She nodded. You saved us more than you know. Cole looked toward the fading sunlight. People saved themselves once they started paying attention. Charlotte studied him for a moment. There was no arrogance. No desire for credit. Only quiet honesty. The same quality that filled every notebook on the shelf behind him. For years, she had measured value through titles, presentations, and executive performance. Standing there beside a small-town garage, she realized she had overlooked something far more important. Wisdom does not always arrive wearing a suit. Sometimes it arrives carrying a wrench. And as the last light of day settled across Cedar Creek, Charlotte Mercer began preparing for something she had never imagined doing. She was going to tell the entire country exactly who had saved her company. 3 weeks later, the cameras arrived in Tulsa. News vans lined the street outside Mercer Mobility headquarters. Reporters gathered near the entrance. Financial analysts filled the front rows of the auditorium. Industry leaders watched through live streams. For the first time since the crisis began, Charlotte Mercer was scheduled to address the public. Everyone expected updates. Everyone expected explanations. Many expected damage control. Almost nobody expected the truth she was about to tell. Back in Cedar Creek, life looked remarkably ordinary. The morning sun shined through the windows of Harrison Garage. Customers arrived with routine repairs. A farmer waited for a brake inspection. A teacher needed a battery replacement. The smell of coffee drifted through the office while country music played softly in the background. Cole Harrison stood beneath the hood of an old pickup truck, completely focused on his work. Lily sat nearby finishing homework. Nothing about the scene suggested they were connected to a national news event unfolding hundreds of miles away. Around 11 o'clock, Daniel Reeves called. You might want to turn on the television. Cole glanced toward the office. Why? Daniel laughed softly. Just trust me. Minutes later, Lily switched on the small television mounted in the corner of the waiting area. The broadcast appeared immediately. Mercer Mobility's logo filled the screen. Reporters crowded the auditorium. Camera flashes lit the stage. Then Charlotte Mercer walked to the podium. The room grew silent. She looked composed as always, but something about her expression felt different. More thoughtful, more grounded. The kind of look people wear after learning a lesson they never expected to learn. Good afternoon, she began. Today I want to speak honestly about the challenges our company has faced over the past several months. The audience listened carefully. Charlotte spoke about the engine failures, the investigations, the mistakes. She accepted responsibility without excuses. Investors watched. Journalists took notes. The atmosphere remained serious. Then she said something nobody expected. The most important thing I need to discuss today is not the problem itself. It is the person who identified it. Several reporters looked up immediately. Charlotte continued. For 10 years, one individual documented the exact issue that eventually caused our crisis. For 10 years, he submitted reports, observations, and recommendations. For 10 years, those warnings were overlooked. A murmur moved through the room. Cole stopped what he was doing and looked toward the television. Lily smiled before Charlotte even finished speaking. She already knew where this was going. On the screen, Charlotte paused briefly. Then she said the name. His name is Cole Harrison. The auditorium fell completely silent. Not confused silence. Respectful silence. The kind that arrives when people suddenly realize they have underestimated someone. Charlotte continued. She described the notebooks, the data, the years of careful work. She explained how a mechanic in a small Oklahoma town had understood the problem long before an entire corporation did. She never exaggerated. She never dramatized. She simply told the truth. By the end of the speech, dozens of reporters were searching for information about Harrison Garage. Industry websites began publishing articles. News anchors repeated his story. Social media filled with comments about humility, expertise, and perseverance. In Cedar Creek, however, very little changed. Later that afternoon, a customer arrived needing help with an aging tractor. Cole fixed it. Another customer needed an oil change. Cole handled that too. The phone rang more often than usual, but the work remained the same. Around sunset, Charlotte arrived at the garage one final time. This visit felt different from all the others. No crisis, no emergency, no pressure. She simply wanted to say thank you in person. The Oklahoma sky glowed orange and gold beyond the open bay door. Evening wind moved gently through the grass beside the highway. Charlotte stood near the workbench while Lily organized tools. The speech was nice, Cole said. Charlotte smiled. It was overdue. You did not have to do that. Yes, she replied quietly. I did. For a moment neither spoke. The garage felt peaceful. The kind of peace that follows when the truth finally finds its place. Charlotte looked toward the shelf of notebooks. Do you know what impressed me most? Cole shook his head. You never stopped documenting the problem. She glanced at him. Even when nobody listened. Cole smiled gently. The truth does not become less true just because people ignore it. Charlotte laughed softly. I think that sentence belongs in one of those notebooks. Nearby, Lily pretended not to listen while smiling proudly. The sun continued sinking toward the horizon. Long shadows stretched across the concrete floor. For years, people saw Cole Harrison as a mechanic. Nothing more. They saw oil stains, work boots, and a small-town garage. What they missed was character, wisdom, quiet strength, the qualities that do not demand attention but eventually earn it. As Charlotte drove away and evening settled over Cedar Creek, the garage